Thank you, Chair. Brad Kitschke, I'm the Director of Public Policy for Uber.
Do you have an opening statement?
I do. Thanks very much for the committee for giving us the opportunity to appear today and for the opportunity to provide our written submission. We're a technology company. We have an app, a piece of software that connects a rider who has been pre-authorised to access the software with a driver who has undergone background checks and safety checks. We're popular because Queenslanders have experienced what getting a safe, reliable and affordable ride is like at the touch of a button. And they're telling their friends. In only 18 months, more than 300,000 Queenslanders have chosen to use Uber as their preferred way to get around. And over 4,000 Queenslanders have partnered with Uber to earn some additional income. In that time, there has also been a relentless campaign of scaremongering, intimidation and fear from organisations focused more on protecting their patch than focusing on the interests of consumers or improving their own service levels. However, it's clearly not working because people are voting with their feet. We have 100 staff in Australia and about 20 of those are based in Queensland, so we're also growing Queensland jobs. Ride sharing is not a taxi service and it is different than taxis and hire car service, and I'll explain why. There's no anonymity on the Uber platform, unlike when someone gets in a taxi. All riders on the Uber platform are pre-registered and known to Uber. The service is not available to the broader public who are not registered onto the platform, unless obviously they're travelling with someone who is on the platform. All drivers on the Uber platform are registered, and in Queensland, 100% of those drivers have a driver authorisation from the Department of Transport and Main Roads. This means that the Queensland Government has done the criminal history background check, the driver history check, and also signed off on the medical check for 100% of Uber drivers. When a driver accepts a request for a trip, their details, including the photograph, name, make and model and registration of the vehicle, are shared with the rider so they can see the vehicle approaching their location. Ride-sharing drivers do not pick up street rank or hail, and this makes up, the street rank and hail market makes up about 70% of the total point-to-point transport market. There's no cash exchanging hands in a ride-sharing trip, and you can't advance book for ride-sharing. So we only use credit cards. You can't ring up and say, I'd like a ride-sharing vehicle at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. It's only on demand and ready to ride. It's a new model of transport which is not defined by the existing regulations, and the definitions in the current regulations and legislation do not expressly capture ride-sharing. The argument that ride-sharing should simply be regulated exactly the same way as a taxi, because they both transport people, has already been recognised by governments that different forms of point-to-point transport, like taxis and chauffeured hire cars, are regulated in different ways. They both transport people, but they have different models, they have different risks and different mitigation of those risks, and they're regulated in different ways. Ride-sharing only operates in a very discrete part of the point-to-point market. As I mentioned before, more than 70% of the work of the point-to-point market, the work of a taxi, is rank and hail work. This is work that is not available to ride-sharing and is only available to taxis. Taxis also operate in the advanced pre-booked market, which they also shared with chauffeur hire cars. Again, this is not available to ride-sharing. And in the markets, for example, such as the ACT, that's been enshrined in the regulations. To approach the debate with the notion that all parts of a market have access to an equal playing field is fundamentally wrong. The government's already recognised that different models with different access to different parts of the market and different risks get regulated in different ways. And this is why, as I said, they've regulated chauffeur hire cars and taxis in different ways. Data from the Australian Taxi Industry Association and CabCharge actually indicates that the number of people taking trips in taxis in Australia and in Queensland has increased, despite ride-sharing being around for 18 months. This would indicate that ride-sharing trips are new trips, and that ride-sharing isn't simply capturing an existing market, it's actually growing the total size of the market. To simply conflate ride-sharing with a taxi service is a poor approach to public policy, and it isn't accurate. It's also inaccurate to say that the entrance of ride-sharing into the point-to-point market will mean the replacement of taxis. We believe, as has indicated in many markets overseas, that ride-sharing and taxis can operate side by side. We are just another part of the suite of transport options. Ride-sharing services areas of the market that traditional taxi services do not. It provides wealth creation opportunities for the unemployed and the underemployed, and it allows people to access a different kind of service. It's been made clear through quite a bit of scaremongering and even a question from the committee today that Uber doesn't have a product for those people with different accessibility needs. That's just fundamentally wrong and an absolute falsehood. I'd like to be clear that no Australian court has found ride-sharing to be unlawful. The one case that was taken to court by the Department of Transport and Main Roads in Queensland was dismissed by the magistrate. These are not matters for courts anyway. They're matters for the government to make policy decisions, and the government has instituted a review. We believe that in relation to the specifics of this bill, it's pretty clear from the public commentary that it's being used as a weapon against ride-sharing, even though it's not specific to that in the legislative language. It has been from the public commentary. We're quite concerned that the bill was drafted without any consultation. We never met with Mr Katter. We made 5 requests to meet with Mr Katter. Mr Katter telephoned me for 15 minutes the day before the bill was introduced, and we were quite concerned that someone would actually seek to introduce a piece of legislation and not bother to perhaps consult with the whole range of industry participants. It's pretty clear that the Taxi Council was consulted heavily, however we were not consulted. In our view, this bill is simply about punishing Queenslanders who provide a service that is welcomed by other Queenslanders. And it is intended just to simply protect the turf of an incumbent monopoly. As Choice, the consumer organisation, rightly said in its recent report, the point of regulating should be to protect consumers and encourage competition in the market, not to protect one particular business from its competitors. We submit that this bill does not meet the foundational principle of legislation.
Thank you very much. Earlier in your statement, you talked about 300,000. That was 300,000 Queenslanders choose to use Uber. How do you get to these people to take an interest in the service that you're providing? Most
of the people that sign up for our service are simply by word of mouth. We don't do a lot of traditional advertising. People have found out about the service through their friends. They've tried it with their friends, and the feedback to us is that they found it to be superior to services that they've used before, and they do it. We don't really do a lot of aggressive marketing in that particular respect.
So how do they get to join that list of people?
So you download the app. You then have to provide certain amounts of information into the app, credit card details. You need to provide, obviously, information about who you are. So there is a pre-verification process, obviously, for the rider. And then similarly, there's the pre-verification process for the driver. So for a driver who wants to drive, they would come into our office, they would talk to us, they would then go to the Department of Transport and Main Roads. The Department of Transport and Main Roads would give them the driver authority and do the criminal history background check, driver history check, and sign off on the medical. And then the person would go and ensure that their vehicle has a third-party vehicle inspection. So we have an organisation that conducts third-party vehicle inspections once every 12 months. That's a requirement on our platform, and the person does that. If all of those things come through, then we allow the person to become a driver and partner with us on the platform.
Thank you. Point-to-point, what's your definition of point-to-point?
My definition of a point-to-point, going from one point to another.
For sure. But when a person's travelling from one point to another, how do you get your people, these 300,000, how do you get any individual from that 300,000 to be aware that you're standing nearby to act as a pick-up and take home?
So when you request a ride on the app, you put in the address where you're at. You can also press a button to say drop the pin, which will provide the GPS location. The driver that is in the nearest line of sight, closest, is sent a message on their app to say there is someone at this address. For example, Parliamentary Annex. There's someone at the Parliamentary Annex who, and by the way, it's a very popular pickup spot. The Parliamentary Annex, someone wants to be picked up there. The driver has 15 seconds to press a button to accept that ride, and then they go and pick them up. The rider then is advised by the app. For example, Jim is your driver. There's a picture of Jim. There's Jim's vehicle number plate and also the type of car that you're in, so you can identify. When the driver turns up, you obviously would ask the rider, are you Brad? Yes, jump in the car. At the end of the trip, the driver presses a button, then the rider's credit card is debited, and they're emailed a receipt pretty much immediately. Yeah.
Do you offer incentives to people to join your...
There are a range of incentives for people to join. Sometimes it's if people who are an existing driver want another person, a friend, to sign up, we'll offer an incentive. We also offer incentives in terms of guaranteed hourly earnings. So on the Uber app, people only do it part-time, so it's not a full-time gig. The average person would work and drive around about 20 hours a week, and for 20 hours a week, they're getting about $30 an hour.
Yeah. Do you offer incentives to the public to come and join Uber?
Sometimes, so for example, we would do a give-get code where it says, if I'm a rider and I can get a code that I'll give to a friend, and they'll get the first $10 off their first ride.
I've been told as much as $45. Is that any
It depends on the individual promotion.
Who's the driver? Or
Sorry?
The company?
The company is offering an incentive, not the driver.
Okay, well, how does that become individual?
Sorry?
How does that become individual?
I said individual promotion is in, are we running a promotion over this month or,
Okay.
Brad, I'm not sure how long you've been here today, but there's been some issues that have been brought up, and I'd like you to respond to some of those. So
sure.
You said before that the difference with ride sharing, and I won't talk about Uber, just ride sharing versus taxi industry, is you don't have any hail or rank pickups.
Or advanced booking.
Can you tell me what the difference is between those and Uber zones?
So an Uber zone is something that's been set up in where we have large festivals, and it's essentially a place that somebody can go to when there's a large event, knowing that their pre-requested rider can go there to essentially meet them. So it's not a rank. A rank works in you line up. This is not where cars are banking up waiting for someone. This is just a place where the driver knows that they can drive in. So I would call, for example, the car park of the Parliamentary Annex is essentially a zone, because if I book a ride, the driver knows they can come into that spot, I can jump in and they go. It's fundamentally different from a rank because there is no lining up, there is no waiting, there is no sitting waiting for the next fare. It's already requested. They could be 5 or 10 minutes away. It's just that they know that that spot is there for them to pick the person up.
Wouldn't drivers tend to culminate around those areas, though?
Generally, no, because they're pretty busy and our average pickup time is less than 4.5 minutes. So they're getting a fair bit of work. They don't need to sit and wait.
So the RACQ in their discussion with us said that they weren't sure whether somebody who has an accident who is covered by RACQ may in fact be covered if they are providing a ride share. What's your comments on that, and what does your company do about that?
Sure. So the first thing I think I need to make with respect to insurance is that there have been what essentially have just been fundamental lies perpetrated by the Taxi Council of Queensland and its supporters with respect to insurance. Every Uber partner is required to have insurance, so third-party property or comprehensive, and we check that when the person signs up to the platform. If that person's individual insurance, for whatever reason, doesn't cover something when it happens, then we have a $20 million third-party bodily injury and property damage policy, which is issued by an Australian insurer, CGU, which covers every ride-sharing trip. So it's fundamentally wrong to say that a person can get into a ride-sharing vehicle as a passenger and there be an accident and an Australian insurer doesn't cover them. That is what has been perpetrated by the TCQ, and I'm here to tell you today it's a fundamental lie.
So you've got a $20 million policy that
Yes.
covers every Uber driver in Australia.
Every Uber trip.
Every Uber trip. So I imagine if someone has a serious accident, that policy will get eaten up very quickly. Won't
But we have more than 15,000 drivers on the road in Australia every day. Just like the taxi industry, incidents happen. I've not seen one report of anything happening or one report of a ride-sharing passenger where something has happened and they've said they've not been covered.
Can you give us any confidential information about what claims have been made?
I'll talk to our insurance arm if you like, and I can get some further information on the detail of insurance. I mean, you would be aware, for example, that the ACT has regulated ride sharing, and so we've had to have conversations with the CTP insurers, the CTP regulator, and make them comfortable with the way in which our insurance arrangements operate. In the ACT, the CTP providers are the commercial insurance providers, so NRMA, Suncorp, NRMA and a couple of others. And they are comfortable with the arrangements and those arrangements are the same as the arrangements in Queensland.
Okay, can you tell me, does that policy cover the other person that's involved in the accident and the passenger and the car that is involved?
No, the person's individual insurance covers the car.
So my understanding would be that if you're operating an illegal service or haven't declared to your insurance company that you are running that service, that you probably wouldn't be covered, your car.
So I think insurers have wrestled with the question of what's the difference between a real estate agent who picks up somebody who's their client and drives them around on a Saturday, showing them 5 houses, to someone who drives for 3 hours during the week, doing ride sharing. There's no difference, and that's why the ACT CTP regulator has agreed that ride-sharing vehicles we recognise under the CTP scheme as Class 1, which is private use, because there is an amount of private use that is allowed, commercial use there's an amount of non-private use allowed in those policies, and it is no different. If I went out and did ride-sharing for 5 hours a week, my normal insurance policy would probably cover it.
Yeah, it seems like a very grey area to me. One last question.
I think the RACQ made the best point, which is because of the fact that this is an emerging industry, I think that the insurance industry will catch up and just have a specific product where someone can ring up and say, you know, I've got my normal RACQ policy, but I do 5 hours a week ride sharing, so can you add on the ride sharing addition, and it'll probably be a small additional fee, and that's how it'll be covered.
Okay. Just be careful about this question, okay? I want to talk about GST, but if there's a court case going on, tell us now and we won't talk about it. So
I can answer questions about the goods and services tax that won't prejudice the matters that are before the court.
Right. Is that okay? Yeah. So we heard before that the ATO had ruled that your drivers should be paying GST and that maybe you're not. Can you clarify that for us?
So in Australia, any individual or small business doesn't have to register and get an ABN and do quarterly BAS statements unless their turnover, their revenue, is greater than $75,000. So your local lawn mowing person, if they're running a small business and they don't earn $75,000 a year, they are not required to register for GST. They're not required to get a BAS and get an ABN and do the quarterly business statements. So ride sharing, we don't believe is a taxi service. We believe ride sharing is not a taxi service, and it should be treated no differently, for example, than someone who puts their house on Airbnb. If they've got a spare room or a holiday house, they can put that onto Airbnb. They can earn $74,999 a year and not get an ABN and not do. Sorry, in what way?
Anyway.
So I think you need to be more specific on that.
Are you blocking compliance investigations by the department?
Are you tracking phone,
So there have been some incidences of people using the platform outside of the terms of service, and when someone uses the platform outside of the terms of service, they're not allowed to use the platform anymore.
So your terms of service prevent Main Roads...
That's not what I said.
I'm asking a question. So the Department of Transport and Main Roads is prevented from undertaking compliance investigations under Queensland law because your terms of service prevent it.
That's not what I said.
You said that your terms
What I said was if somebody uses the app outside of the terms of service, then they're removed from being able to use the app.
So
I don't know of the specific circumstance or the specific information to which you're referring to, so I can't answer more specifically.
It's an interesting response. I just have one more, please, Chair. From what you've described today, Uber, you can order a car, it picks you up from one point and drops you off to another in a vehicle, the customer pays by a credit card, The charges are based on time and distance. There's a pool of drivers available, and those drivers are remunerated for their work. What is it? I haven't heard anything apart from the rank and hail system that differs Uber between a taxi.
Or a hire car, if you're going to use that analogy. And that's where I think there's a fundamental flaw. There's a conflation of these issues that says, well, ride-sharing does a little bit of this, so therefore it's the same as taxis. Well, hire car, chauffeur-driven hire car has a pool of drivers. It charges a fare. It picks someone up from somewhere to where they want to go. Why aren't they regulated like a taxi then? Why haven't you as a legislator said, well, that's exactly the same as a taxi, regulate a chauffeured hire car exactly the same as a taxi? And the reason is because they have different access to different markets with a different model, and they do things in a different way. And so regulators have said taxis can be regulated like this because they do this kind of work, because they have access to this kind of the market. Chauffeured hire cars can be regulated in this way. Ride sharing is different. It doesn't do street rank and hail. It has a different model. It mitigates risks in a different way. And so it needs a regulatory approach. I'm not denying that it needs a regulatory approach, but it's a fundamental conflation to continue just to say and to not recognise that the Parliament has already regulated different forms of point-to-point transport that compete with each other in a different way.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you for your attendance today, and I'd ask that the audience just behave yourselves when this gentleman attempts to leave the room.
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to the additional information, if someone's able to email me the specifics of what you're after, try and get the information back to you, if not today, tomorrow.
Thank you very much.